The senator from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for this opportunity to speak on this issue, which is clearly important to millions of Americans, and one that I'm too familiar with. I think I've shared this in the past personally, but I'll share it again. Obviously, my parents didn't make a lot of money, so I would not have gone to college. I would not have gone to law school had it not been for federal financial aid, both in the form of Pell Grants and loans and work study. All of these programs opened that door for me. And in fact, I don't think any of my siblings could have gone to college without some assistance. But the point is that I know how important these programs are to Americans. In fact, when I was elected to the Senate in 2010, I still had a student loan that was over $100,000. And I was fortunate enough to, as I've said this publicly, write a book, which is now available on paperback if anyone's interested. But, with the proceeds that I made from that, I was able to pay off that loan. Had it not been for that, I'm not sure when I would have paid off my student loan for law school, because it was over $100,000. Early on, when I had multiple student loans from both undergrad and law school, and the private loans I had to take out for the bar study, there were months where my student loan payments were higher than anything else I was paying. At its peak, it was about $1,400 a month. And that's with a graduate and a law degree and making what most people would consider as a pretty good living. Even with that, it was a real load. Now, obviously, that's at the high end of the spectrum, but even if you talk about the average student loan debt in America today being around $25,000 or $26,000, the evidence is clear that this is having an impact on graduates. So you graduate from college, you have the student loan debt around your neck, and it actually prevents you from doing things like starting your life, buying a home. In some instances, if you fall behind on your payments, it starts to hurt your credit rating. And the evidence continues to grow that a significant percentage of young Americans is facing a challenge that no Americans before us has faced with regards to this sort of student loan debt that hangs over their neck. So clearly we need to have to figure out a permanent solution, not a one-year solution, but a long-term solution on the issue of student loan rates. That's important, and that's an important part of this debate. But here's what I think is missing in this debate, and that is an open acknowledgement that what we have today in higher education, as it is currently structured, is becoming increasingly and inexplicably unaffordable. And that's the part that isn't being discussed here. The fundamental problem here isn't the loans. The fundamental problem here is the tuition rates that continue to climb across this country. In fact, according to the Wall Street Journal today, institutions of higher education, they grew their revenue faster than inflation from 2005 to 2011. And of course, the spending also grew. How many other parts of our economy grew their revenue and their spending at a pace faster than inflation over the last decade? The evidence is that every time we increase the amount of student aid that's available in both Pell Grants and in loan programs, that's just eaten up by a higher tuition rate. Now, as a former state legislator in Florida, that was a battle we had every year because the universities said they needed higher tuition in order to retain quality faculty, et cetera. To some extent, I imagine some of that is true. But at the end of the day, there comes a point, especially in our public institutions, where quality but also affordability have to meet. We cannot continue to price people out of higher education in this country because it's inextricably linked to our future well-being. You know, there's two fundamental problems that face our economy. Number one is we don't have an economy that's growing fast enough, producing the kind of middle-class jobs that allow people to have the kind of lifestyle all Americans want. But the other problem is we have a skills gap in America, where a growing number of people simply have not acquired the skills they need for 21st century middle-class jobs. And the only way to close that skills gap is through education, and particularly higher education. What I would argue today is that the model of higher education that we have in place today, largely based on 19th and 20th century models, is broken. It no longer lives up to the reality of the 21st century. For example, many of the higher paying jobs in the middle class today don't require a four-year degree from a liberal arts college. They require less than 2 years or a two-year degree program that you could get at a community college. There are other things available to us in terms of how we can incentivize or reform our higher education programs. We should look at accreditation reform. Right now, in order to get student loans or federal aid from the federal government, you have to go to an institution that's accredited. And traditionally, these are the traditional four-year institutions or a two-year institution. But there are now alternatives available to us, things that we weren't doing a few years ago. Number one, we should rely increasingly on community colleges, which, by the way, are really a treasure in this country. The services that community colleges provide students to get some of those two-year degrees. In fact, some community colleges are in the four-year degree program, and they have tailored programs that allow people that are working to go to school and get this while they can continue to work. That's an important part of the backbone. It's also an extraordinary part of retraining people. You might have a job and all of a sudden that job just doesn't exist anymore. And you're going to have to go out and get retrained in a new skill or a new trade. The community colleges are an important part of that component. It goes beyond that, though. Career and technical education. For the life of me, I do not understand why we have stigmatized that in this country. Why we've created this idea that unless you get a 4-year degree or more, that you're somehow not successful. When we know that we have a shortage of people that we need to be trained in the skills and in the trades that we once used to do in this country, we should get back to some of that. We should encourage that, quite frankly, even before the college level. Why can't we graduate kids from high school with an industry certification in a career or in a trade? So when they graduate high school, they get a diploma and they're industry certified to go to work. We have examples of that on a smaller scale in South Florida, where a car dealer, every single year, a friend of mine down in South Florida, he actually takes high school kids and begins to train them as BMW technicians. They go to school in the morning for a couple of hours, and then they go over to the shop and they get trained. When they graduate high school, they are BMW certified technicians. Within a year after that, they can get even higher levels of accreditation, and some of them start making $35,000, $40,000 a year to start out of high school. Why aren't we doing more of that? Instead of leaving kids trapped, they feel like, I'm studying stuff I don't like and doesn't speak to me. They drop out of high school. They languish in the economy for 10 or 15 years, and then sometimes they'll find themselves into a for-profit college or some other program to try to get them trained. Let's avoid all that. Let's allow ourselves to provide these children, these kids, these high school students and others across this country with an opportunity to study something they enjoy and they love, and to get the skills so they can avoid all of that. We also have this new revolution in massive online coursework. Now, not every course can be taken that way, but we now have the ability to allow people to actually have self-directed learning, to use the internet platforms that are available. So you can take a course in political science from Harvard and economics from Yale. You can sit there and actually put your own coursework together. This is still being developed. But this is an important part of our future innovation, the ability to bring the classroom and the learning experience to the student, not just require them to sit for lectures for an hour and a half in a classroom when they could easily get the lecture online. And it can be tailored to their schedule, to their workload, to their needs. Beyond that, you see innovations in terms of giving people credit for work experience or life experience. You see colleges are doing that now, where you can go in and you can say, this is what I've done for the last 20 years of my life, and you get credit for that work because you have life experience and work experience in a field. They don't just make you sit there and spend a bunch of money on electives that you're never going to use and don't really need because, quote, they want you to be well-rounded, unquote. But all it does, in fact, is drive up the cost of your education. I don't know about you, but in the last years of my 4-year degree, I was searching for electives to take because I had to have electives. I don't even remember what some of those electives were, but I paid for them. I paid for them with student loans and Pell Grants. I would much rather have just gotten my degree in the things I needed to know so that I could have moved on to law school and do that there. These are some of the ideas that we have in terms of how we should revolutionize our higher ed system to reflect the needs and the realities of the 21st century. The fact of the matter is we have a challenge before us now unlike anything we've ever had. Industries are now evolving on a yearly basis. Most Americans are going to have to be retrained at some point in their lives on a new skill because that's just the pace of change. And we need to have the infrastructure in place to provide that for people in a way that's affordable. In a way that's affordable. It reminds me of the story of a friend that I had. It was one of the parents on one of my son's teams. And the mom, she was always struggling because she was always the first one to get laid off at her office. She worked primarily as a receptionist at a dental clinic or a medical clinic, got a little bit into billing. But what she really needs to become, and what she really would like to become, is an ultrasound technician. So she can make a little bit more money, have more job security, and provide her kids with the opportunities she wants them to have. The problem that she has is she has to work 8 hours during the day. How is she going to do that and then go to school and get that training? And I'm telling you, in many parts of this country, we do not have the infrastructure in place for that to happen, and our financial aid programs, both on the loan side and on the Pell Grant side, do not provide the flexibility for them to be able to do that in the most cost-effective way. To that end, by the way, I've proposed a number of pieces of legislation. Most of them are bipartisan. I've worked with Senator Wyden and others on the Student Right to Know Before You Go Act. That basically means that before you take out these loans, you're going to be provided meaningful information on this is how much it's going to cost to go to school here. This is how much people that graduate with this degree from this college make when they graduate, and this is how much you're going to owe. You can still take the course, you can still major in that, but you deserve to know. You deserve to know that if you're going to owe $20,000 and you're only going to make $20,000 a year when you graduate with this degree, it's going to take you a long time to pay it, if ever. Students have a right to know before you go. That's the Student Right to Know Before You Go Act. I've also offered legislation last week, the Higher Education and Skills Attainment Act, which will create one universal tax credit for higher education, and it'll produce measurable savings, some of which can be redirected to the shortfalls in the Pell Grant program that are coming up. The bill basically offers one tax credit for students who are most in need, giving students the ability to avoid navigating a confusing maze of temporary tax provisions worth different amounts for different income thresholds. And by the way, people involved in job skill training would also have access to this universal credit, as opposed to all these different credits that are floating out there now that people don't fully understand how to use. There are other ideas that we've proposed. I've introduced legislation with Senator Coons that provides an innovative partnership that will create an interactive source of information for students to be able to create college savings accounts. Studies have shown that American children with college savings accounts in their name are 7 times more likely to go to college than students without one. This bill will combine innovative student support tools with savings accounts to promote access for low-income students in our country, to be able to put some money aside to be able to do this. Fact of the matter is that today's 21st century student requires a higher education system that best suits their needs, whether that's in the form of a traditional university, a community college, a career or technical education, workforce retraining programs, or a combination of all of these things. And I'm not saying this is not an important debate to have, because it is. It's facing people right now. But I hope at some point we will look at our student aid programs and what we can do to tailor them to the 21st century, to all of the innovations that are now available to us to allow people to gain the knowledge they need to become competitive in a 21st century economy. And that's going to require, in my opinion, a significant restructuring in how our higher education is developed. This is not a threat to liberal arts college or traditional four-year educations. That will always be part of our system. It's an important part of our system. But that doesn't work for everybody. Not because they're not smart enough, but because they have a job during the day, because they're raising 3 kids. If you're a single mom with 3 kids and a full-time job, you can't just leave all that behind and go to Gainesville, Florida, to the University of Florida for 4 years. You need the ability to be able to get that degree that allows you to do it. I lived that. My sister had to do that. She went back to school in her 30s and finished her college degree and then got her master's to become a teacher. And today, she's an assistant principal, all the while raising 2 boys on her own. She would not have been able to do that if the only choice she had available to her was the University of Florida or Florida State, because you can't just move. That doesn't work for someone in that part of their lives. We need to have answers to this. And so I hope that we will spend some time focusing on what we can do in reforming the way we accredit colleges, particularly when it comes to student financial aid, and in the way we structure our financial aid programs, so that the education system meets the needs of our 21st century students and not the other way around.